The next story is another one from Frank, who seems to have simultaneously the best and worst luck when it comes to sea life. I saw a great white shark come out of nowhere behind him once, only for it to simply bump him with its nose and move on without harming him or anyone else. The danger in this story, though, comes from a very different sort of creature. If you've read of my other stories, you probably know that Frank is a tiny bit reckless. Likes to dive alone in remote locations, often at night. This time he was doing a cave dive, at night. By himself. Which is pretty much the diver's entire list of do not do this if you want to live. So, it's no surprise that he got himself into a bit of a dangerous situation. He was a bit sparse on the details, but the trouble started sometime after he entered the cave. The initial passage was wide but narrowed significantly before opening up into a number of larger passages. Frank had left the initial entry and was pulling himself through the narrowest part of the passage. That was when he felt something bump up against his leg. Immediately, he froze. Something or someone was directly behind him in the narrow passage. It was too narrow for him to look behind himself, let alone turn himself around. So, he gritted his teeth and slowly inched himself backwards through the passage. After a few moments had passed without encountering anything, he began to think that it had been some curious fish or his imagination. For a second, he thought it might be Frederick playing a prank on him. That's when the creature slammed into the back of his knee at high speed. The force of the impact threw Frank forward, bouncing him between the narrow passage walls. His first instinct was to get out of the narrow part of the cave so that he could defend himself, but the blow had done significant damage and pain shot up his leg when he tried bending the knee that had been struck. Kicking with his uninjured leg and pulling against the walls of the passage with his hands, Frank desperately pushed on through the widening passage. Before he could reach an area wide enough to turn around, another blow from the creature struck the back of his other knee. Pain shot up his leg, and as he tried to keep going, something grabbed the back of his flipper and yanked back on it, sending another searing jolt of pain from the knee up his leg. On the verge of panic now, Frank desperately pulled himself forward through the passage, where it finally mercifully widened enough to turn. He whirled around to face his attacker, and found himself staring at the long, fleshy snout and beady eyes of an Amazonian river dolphin. The creature stared at him from a few feet beyond his reach in the narrow passage, partially obscured by the blood now beginning to cloud the water. Frank's first thought was, "You shouldn't be here." Which is true. As the name would seem to indicate, Amazonian river dolphins live in rivers, not caves. Not to mention that this was a saltwater cave accessed from the ocean, and this species of dolphin was freshwater. Frank was in the right part of the world to meet one of these dolphins, but the one in this cave was extremely out of place. Of course, whether something should or shouldn't be somewhere didn't change the fact that there was a very large, very intelligent animal that seemed to want him dead blocking his exit from the cave. The dolphin stayed nearly perfectly still as Frank stared him down into a pair of dead, beady eyes. Slowly, Frank reached back to the leg holster for his knife only to find it empty. The dolphin didn't blink or move, but Frank said he saw an imperceptible change in the thing's eyes. It didn't vocalize or even move an inch, but Frank knew from what he saw in those eyes that it was trying to kill him. Not because it was going to eat him, not because he was in its territory or any other reason animals usually kill. It was going to kill him because it wanted to. Because it liked it. Frank has always said that he's never seen a true sea monster. That thing in the cave, though. He told me. That was a sea monster. The standoff lasted for a few more minutes before Frank decided it was in his best interest to move further down the cave. Slowly he backed himself down the widening passage, keeping his eyes locked with the killer that shadowed his movements from a distance. The entire time the thing never vocalized, never made a sound, which scared Frank almost as much as the attack itself. Dolphins wear their emotions on their sleeve, he said to me. They are very expressive creatures, and I've never seen one be this quiet before or since. Frank continued backing down the passage, glancing back over his shoulder to see how close he was to the main chamber. Without warning, the dolphin struck. But Frank had been expecting that. He whirled back around, hands out in front of his face. The creature hadn't had enough space to build up a lot of speed, and Frank was able to push the blow aimed at his mask to the side with his forearms before grabbing the thing's snout and slamming it into the cave wall several times. It thrashed and spun, knocking Frank's grip loose. It backed up a few feet and kept its distance as Frank considered his options. He couldn't stay put forever, and the chance of help arriving was slim to none. If he tried to leave the cave, the dolphin would probably just push him back. There was no exit further down the cave as far as Frank knew. Several sections were unexplored, but he didn't want to bet his chances on finding an exit while being chased by a killer dolphin. That seemed like the only option though, so Frank began to back up further through the passage. His attacker followed him again, albeit at a further distance than before. Right as Frank reached the part where the passage opened up fully, he slowed to a stop with one hand resting on the cave wall. In a flash of movement, the dolphin streaked forward through the water toward Frank. He had only one chance to get this right. Now, that thing was smart. And he knew it. Frank said to me, sipping at his bourbon. But he didn't know that I knew it. And what else he didn't know, I was smarter. Frank had guessed that the dolphin's goal was to get past him the large section of the cave, where Frank would be unable to properly defend himself in the larger open space with his injured legs. And if he tried to get out the cave through the passage, it would either drag him back in or kill him in the open water outside. Frank had only one chance to get it right. As the dolphin burst past him, he slammed one hand into its stomach while grabbing the head and snout with the other. With its momentum briefly halted, he pulled it tightly into a bear hug. That's when he shoved the rock that he'd picked up from the cave floor earlier directly into the creature's blowhole. I could tell that it was shocked, sort of. It didn't know quite what had happened at first. Frank mused to himself, staring into his glass. And it couldn't hear me well, let alone understand me. But I said to myself, "Time's on my side now, you son of a bitch." He knew it too, and scurried off down the tunnel in a flash. I could see him, trying to get that rock loose. There was a few bubbles I saw, but I'm fairly certain it was stuck in there real good. Frank chuckled, drinking the rest of his bourbon. And when I finally got out the cave up back to the surface, slowly, mind you, on account of being unable to use my legs, that's when I saw him again in the moonlight. He was gasping for air, all pathetic-like. Couldn't get enough past that rock to breathe proper, and couldn't dislodge it neither. I looked him straight in the eye, and then I swam away. I'd imagine he perished shortly after, the murderous son of a bitch. The next story I received from a diver who worked as a marine researcher in the Gulf of Mexico. So this happened when I was working with a crew doing natural research. Biologists. I am here to make their insurance happy, because I have been diving in these waters for many years. Stay near them if they dive, stop the bad things from happening. They are doing research with how do you call them? Humboldt squid. My abuelito taught me when I was very young about the Diablo Rojo, which you call Humboldt squid. He was a fisherman, my abuelito. Abuelito would always tell me to not be near the water at night, or I will fall in and eaten by Diablo Rojo. These Humboldt squid, they are as large as 2 meters, very dangerous. Biologists are working to discover the hunting pattern of the squid. They are using a new sonar to image the squid's movements. The data is being inserted into a computer and translates to 3D images. Very nice equipment, very expensive. I think maybe I am here to protect equipment for insurance as much as people. The research was trying to discover why the squid are talking to one another on a hunt. The Diablo Rojo will hunt in a pack of many hundreds, and he swims upward towards the surface in the pack. The sonar was showing spiraling movements upwards from the deep, searching for prey. Because they are deep squid, the Humboldt must talk to each other through glowing skin. They change the pattern and each pattern has a meaning, though the researchers do not know it. They are trying to discover what the patterns mean, so they watch the sonar and then I go down with them to record the squid pattern. There are many different patterns on the squid, some dark edges on the fin of red, some dark red around the eye, some dark red with pale white around the eye. I believe there are maybe 20 variations total in color. There are 2 dives where we examine the squid and against what my Abu Alito told me, the Diablo Rojo do not attack us. One does come to feel my arm, but he is not very rough and there is no bite. I think he is tasting me. They have the tongue in their arms, they have 8 arms and 2 tentacles. All squid are like this, 8 arms and 2 tentacles. The difference is that the arms have only suckers on the tip, but the tentacle has suckers on the whole of it. The tentacle suckers also have sharp claws in them, for grasping and cutting their prey. On the 3rd night of sonar recordings, we have an anomaly. The squid pack on the sonar do not spiral but rises up instead straight in a line. Biologists are getting very curious, they have never been seeing this behavior before. So, we are diving down to see them, and discover what patterns they have changed because of this behavior. We reach the pack and see something very strange. There is a new pattern of the squid never seen before. The body is white, but below the eye there is a long red streak that runs down from the eye and all into the bottom of their 2 tentacles. And above the eye on the arrow body of the squid is a shape in red, 2 lines across diagonal in an X and another line connecting them at the top. Every squid has this marking, and they are all stopped in water that is very shallow for this squid. The biologists are swimming and recording data, taking pictures, but I am not very happy about this. I feel something is wrong, so I tell them that we are leaving. They refuse to come, so I must stay with them. I am still trying to convince them to leave, when I notice one of the squids has somewhat strangeness to him. He is the largest squid, maybe 8 feet long, but that is not what is wrong. He has 10 tentacles, not 8 arms and 2 tentacles. All along his limbs are sharp claw suckers, instead of just being at the tip. All squids have the 8 arms and 2 tentacles like I said, so this is not right. I tell the researcher to come and look at him, and I show him how he has 10 tentacles. The researcher is very amazed, which is when I notice, he actually has 2 extra tentacles that are hidden together and made to look like a single tentacle. So, this squid has 12 tentacles total, but squid all have only 10 total limbs, with 8 arms and 2 tentacles. The researcher is going to take a closer look, but that is when everything goes very bad. The big squid is very fast and grabs the researcher, dragging her down before I can pull my knife. And the entire pack is going into a frenzy, flashing red and attacking us. Some are pulling at the breathing equipment and I help the 2 other researchers fighting them away. They are attacking the lights and us and gear very ferociously, but I am trying to fight them with my knife and stabbing at them. One is biting into the head of the guy, but I cut his arm off and he is gone. I am bit many times, and they are cutting me with their sharp arms and tentacle. The old man is bit by a Diablo on the neck, and he is squirting dark green blood from his neck. I pinch the vein shut and pull him up with me, while fighting off another Diablo. He is coming towards me with open arms and tentacles forward, so I stab right into the inside of him, but I can feel him grabbing the knife with his beak, and all his arms and tentacles are ripping at me. So, I have to let go of the old man, and grab the body of the Diablo, pulling him into my knife. I shred through his guts, he is limp and falls away so I can grab the old man to pinch his blood vessel again, then we swim to the surface. Fortunately, we don't need a long stop for decompression because the dive was not very deep,